Welcome to this Positively Rural webinar. It's wonderful to welcome people who have attended many times and some new folk as well. This webinar, we're focusing on a place to call home, question mark. We're so glad that you've chosen to participate in this webinar. And if it's your first Positively Rural, then we offer you a especially warm welcome. We hope that this webinar will prove to you to be fruitful and inspiring. My name's Carla Quinette. I'm part of the Learning Network, and Positively Rural is established as a quarterly gathering. These webinars are planned and organised by a team of people who are passionate about mission in the rural context. So I'm glad to be part of this team. During our gatherings, we reflect on how we might best minister and engage in mission within the rural context. And we share good news practice from across the rural context, considering together ideas for mission. It's my pleasure to invite Caroline, who will lead us in our opening prayers. Caroline, you're on mute.
So, as we just come together and spend our time together, we just put aside all that will distract our attention. So we pray that God's Spirit will help us to focus on this issue as we're reminded of how Abram found a place at Bethel. And Jesus said, even foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no home. And so we're mindful of those in our own communities who have no place to call home. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to invite Carin to come and speak to us, and just be mindful that Carin and Joe need to leave our session. So if you have any questions while they're speaking, just hold them or put them in the chat, and we will try and answer many of those before they leave us. But I now hand over to Carin, who's very kindly joined us today to share the research into homelessness in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to meet all of you, new people to me. So yeah, grateful to talk to you. I'm sure that you'll also be able to contribute with your own experiences and encounters with homelessness in the areas that you are in. Right, okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a research project that I completed with Professor Helen Carr from Southampton University, where we collaborated with an organisation called English Rural, who you might be familiar with, looking into the issue of homelessness in the countryside, a hidden crisis. As Caroline said, I'm from the University of Kent, and at Kent I'm a lecturer in law, and I teach on the module homelessness law, and I've been doing research on homelessness for the last 15 years. I also spent 10 years as a support worker and support manager in supported accommodation, working frontline directly with people experiencing homelessness. Great, yeah. So as a background to why this project took place, well, rough sleeping at the time, so this project took place in 2023 for the duration of a year. And before that, rough sleeping had been rising for almost a decade going into the pandemic. The government's rough sleeping strategies had no references to rural homelessness or any targeted interventions. There were many signs that policy wasn't working in rural areas, and even though rough sleeping fell for the first time in a decade between 2018 and 19, in rural areas, that number actually increased at the time. So we felt there was a lack of attention from policymakers and just not enough funding and support for services in rural areas. And that really left a lot of people needing support, instead facing isolation and in some instances also danger. But we did have some international evidence to go on. So our collaborator, Rory Wheel, now working with the coalition that has been taking this work forward after the research. He had completed a study in the US looking at rural homelessness. So we had quite a lot to go on in terms of, where to start, what to look at, and so on. Of course, the landscape will be quite different, both policy and actual landscape between Britain and the US, but it at least gave us some starting points of what to look for. Okay, so after that, what happened next? You may need to a few more times. A group of rural and homelessness organisations came together to form a coalition led by English Rural, including also the National Housing Foundation, Federation, the CPRE, the Countryside Charity, the Rural Services Network, Homeless Link. I'm sure many of you will have had a contact with some of these organisations before, all of whom work in rural areas and take these issues very seriously. So they identified research and evidence gaps and formed a steering group, and then commissioned the research to myself and Helen in Kent and Southampton. What we wanted to do and achieve with this project was to make sure that we had co-production between different sectors and between ourselves and people with experience of homelessness. So we wanted to make sure that we came at this issue from multiple angles and collaboratively, because this kind of research often happens in a silo, an academic that does something and then it gets published in an academic journal, and the people whom will be affected by this and who work with this in everyday life might never read that kind of research. So we wanted to make sure that this was very public facing and that we could reach as many as possible to highlight that this is a real concern, a growing concern, and that we need to collectively do something about it. So what we did do is we had a UK-wide survey which was completed by local authorities, housing and homelessness organisations. So in total, 157 organisations across the country. And in addition to that, we did ethnographic research. So we visited 4 rural sites in South Cambridgeshire, Kent, Herefordshire and North Yorkshire, where we went round, talked to different people in the countryside, looked at the differences between rural, semi-rural, and how the issues are experienced differently between those sites. And we talked to quite a lot of people with experience of homelessness in rural locations. And what we wanted to do really is to examine the impact of austerity and welfare reforms on rural homelessness. So as I mentioned, there was an increase before the pandemic. Then we had a decrease during the pandemic because of everyone in. But since then, homelessness in general has increased at an alarming rate. It is really genuinely terrifying to see the sharp increases in both rough sleeping and other forms of homelessness. So we can go to the next slide. This is a picture of the report that we produced. This is available online for free, so the link is there, and happy to share the link with you in other ways after this as well if you want to read more. We can go to the next one. So as a sort of whistle-stop tour of what we did find in this research, so at the time, rural rough sleeping numbers had increased by 24% in 1 year. That's in contrast to general homelessness, general rough sleeping in the country had increased by 26% that year. The year after, I can now also say it has increased by another 26%. So you can see what's happening there. And not only was there such an increase in rough sleeping, we also found that there were not enough resources to tackle the problem. So from our survey respondents, 83% in rural areas reported that their job had become more difficult in the past 5 years in supporting and alleviating homelessness in rural areas. And part of the reason for that is because there's a 65% funding gap in rural areas compared to urban areas. And you know, as you can see from the numbers, 24% in rural areas was the increase there, and 26% when you look at the country generally. So this perception that there is no homelessness in rural areas is absolutely incorrect. And that is why this project was so important. We did look at what the different kinds of reasons might be partly for why it's such a hidden issue and partly for why it's happening overall. A lot of the people we spoke to talked about shame and stigma in rural communities acting as a barrier to support. So people at the brink of or nearly experiencing homelessness not wanting to seek support because they didn't want to lose face in front of the community or the people around them. We also found that people who were already experiencing homelessness had a lot of physical isolation and limited transport options, and that increased their risks of harm and risk to safety. And of course, the transport issue does limit people's ability to move out of homelessness. We found that informal support networks can play a really key role in rural areas. We heard some very positive examples of farmers and communities providing support and often informally, sort of doorstep cups of tea and providing water or shelter for people, or allowing people to stay on their land with tents and so on. But we also had the feedback that many felt that there was not enough support from local authorities to help them provide this for people. And some of the challenges in rural areas means that people are pushed into urban centres when they don't necessarily want to go there. And what also happens when people are pushed into urban centres is that the demand is so high in those areas that there aren't enough support services there either. And the other problem is, of course, if you have grown up and lived in a rural area or a small community all of your life, moving away from there means that you're moving away from support networks, you're moving away from familiarity and things that might be able to make you feel better. Another problem, of course, is that London commuters shield the real figures of rural poverty and homelessness by which I mean there is a perception that rural areas are wealthy and well off, and that is partly because people are working in city centres and then commuting back to rural areas. And that perception that rural areas are inherently well off is a major barrier to supporting people who are experiencing homelessness and poverty. And that also does push up rent and housing prices in those areas. This is a indication of some of the findings that we had. You can look at these in more detail in the report if you are interested. 86% of the providers that we surveyed considered rural homelessness to be a significant or acute problem. 91% of the respondents have seen homelessness increase in the past 5 years. 80% of organizations in rural areas believe that lack of funding and resources is the main obstacle in addressing homelessness. 81% believe rough sleeping is experienced differently in rural compared to urban areas. This is really important because we need to build strategies that are targeted and different in rural areas. And 23% specifically mention stigma to be a barrier that people experience. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to very briefly just give you a case study. This is the story of Mary, which of course is a pseudonym to protect her real identity. So this is a real story from one of the people we talked to. Mary has 2 children. She was evicted from her house and moved into a caravan. When her children were taken into care, she moved into a tent. Someone disturbed her tent when she went into the local town to get food, so she slept on a bench in the entrance of the church. She was able to collect clean water from the farmer whose land she was staying on. She'd been in trouble with the police for lighting fires to keep warm. And in her own words, like if I'm in a tent, obviously, I know I've had the police come to me a couple of times, like for making a fire. They came out there and they told me to put the fire out. And I'm like, how else do you want me to eat? I've even had friends, obviously, I can't steal. I've had friends who are saying, have you eaten today? And I'm like, no. And they've gone into town and they've actually stole food from me so I could eat that thing. Some of my family don't drive and they've said, come over and you can stay with me. And I'm like, that's down in, and then, you know, a place far away, and it's going to cost about £60 for a train ticket, and I haven't even got 60p. So some of the challenges that Mary spoke about were very prominent for others as well. In particular, if you get given donations, many churches and many food banks that are great at giving donations, but people who are rough sleeping can't use things in tins, for example, or they can't use things that you have to heat up to cook unless they have facilities to do that. So there's definitely some things that are worth thinking about in terms of meeting those needs. So what are the kind of solutions? Well, at a local level, engaging with and working with local communities and collaboration cross-sector. We have been pushing for having a bit of an information campaign with parish councils, so making sure that, you know, for example, in every church or in every community centre, there is a visual poster that says, this is where you can find a food bank, this is where you can find a shelter, this is the number for your local authority, this is where you can go to find help. This exists in many places, but it is not across the board and not everywhere. Improving signposting for Specific services. So we found that in rural areas, there aren't always the kind of niche services that some people require, in particular for people who are LGBTQ, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or queer, or particular mental health services, for example. So if there aren't those services available in the area you're in, trying to find the closest one and being able to signpost that, or an online version. Mobile support, so you can see the picture of a bus on the side there. This is in Sussex, and it's by the charity called Turning Tides that have a bus that goes out and provides some essential services, advice and support in rural areas. We also found that a lot of people are in need of legal advice, probably also welfare advice, such as welfare benefits, for example. So some areas have legal advice clinics available. All of this is, of course, with rose-tinted glasses. We know what we want, but whether the funding is there to provide it is a whole other story. But we can dream and we can try our best. At a structural level, and something that we've been working on in the past year, is to do rural proofing of current policies. So what you may find now in government policies is that there are specific mentions of rural homelessness that we have managed to get in there through a lot of collaboration with MHCLG and the homelessness teams in government. What we also need is affordable housing, supported housing, for the local housing allowance to be increased in rural areas, and so on and so forth. And that's more of a long-term open aim, I guess. Almost towards the end of my slides now. One of the things we looked at in the research and keep looking at is problematizing this idea of homelessness that is hidden. Hidden homelessness is this kind of term that is used quite often, but without much definition or general understanding of what it refers to. So in particular in advocacy and policy, there's a lot of mention of hidden homelessness, but it has not been officially defined as such. Rural rough sleeping and poverty is often referred to as hidden, which is also closely linked with experiences of stigma in rural areas. There are, of course, some groups that are more hidden than others, particularly marginalized groups such as LGBTQ plus people with disabilities, ethnic minorities, care leavers, are particularly struggling in these areas. I'm currently working with the organization called Albert Kennedy Trust on looking at intersecting issues such as these, and especially LGBTQ plus homelessness, to find better strategies for these as well. So yeah, what's been happening since we did this research, and what does the future hold? We, following the research, English Rural went ahead and created the Rural Homelessness Counts Coalition, who have been making excellent progress in making rural homelessness more visible and considered in political circles. They meet regularly. If you're interested, you can join. I have the website is on the next slide. The aim of that coalition is to raise awareness, develop solutions, and foster partnerships to ensure that everyone, regardless of their location, has access to safe and affordable housing. And yeah, I think they're always looking to collaborate with as many as possible. So if this is an area that interests you, please do look them up. yeah, this is some thank yous to the people that supported the research, and you can go to the next slide. Here I just have information and contact details. So if you want to know more, please feel free to contact me, the coalition, and to look at the full report online. That is all.
Thank you so much, Carin. There was a huge amount in there, and I think, showing us the wider possible impacts for, and that crucial comment about how much is hidden and rural, but also fascinated that I'd never perceived or thought of that there's a particular area in law just on homelessness. So thank you so much for the time that you're giving us today. So I'm now going to hand over to Jo, who is in Cornwall, and is going to share with us some of her experience and practice there in Cornwall.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me today. So I'm based as a church and circuit administrator in Saltash Wesley Methodist Church, which is here in Cornwall. We're like on the border between Devon and Cornwall. So we have a bridge and the river separating us from the big city Plymouth. So this does affect us quite a bit because we're almost like a suburb of Plymouth, but because we're Cornwall, we don't get any funding or help from Plymouth. But we do have a lot of people that come across the bridge seeking help with homeless support. We have a lot of people that are travelling further on down in Cornwall because they've got friends or family that they want to get to who are experiencing homelessness. So sometimes we're a bit of a stop-off gap. And sometimes people actually stay in our local area as well, sleeping rough. But we also have a travel lodge in Saltash, which our local council uses as temporary housing. And we also have a nearby village, which has a temporary housing accommodation of about 30 chalets. And this is all kind of really increased in the last 3 to 4 years. And for our town to suddenly have, since COVID, a lot of increase in people experiencing homelessness, it kind of, here at the church, just kind of got us trying to think, how could we help people? How can we make a difference? Because we have people coming to us constantly asking for help and support, whether they were rough sleeping or in temporary accommodation. So over the last couple of years, our kind of hands-on work has really increased, and it has been a real eye-opener to the people here in the church. We're very grateful for Helen Pierce as our district social justice coordinator, because she was been able to give us lots of advice on support. One of the things that she encouraged us to do quite early on in our work was to do the mental health first aid course, which we could access through our local council at a reduced rate. And that was so helpful because it just gave us a really good background into dealing with how we can help and signpost people and give them support when people have got various mental health problems. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey that we're on at the moment as a church, and it's kind of growing more and more. I think also one of the key things for us was our church became a warm space, and it became like a warm space where it was open as a coffee morning every day during the week from 10 until 12, where people can just drop in and have a drink, have some conversation. And we also offer people who are experiencing homelessness a hot breakfast as well. That became really sort of more and more popular, more people using it. I think especially amongst the rough sleepers, the word just got round. They talk to each other, they have their own little networking community, so we became more and more well known for that. And then it made us here at the church think, well, how can we also help with offering like showers to people who are currently sleeping rough. And we actually had some facilities in our building where we could put some electric showers in. And then we went on and got a washing machine and a tumble dryer so we can actually help people to do their laundry. And that's been really, really popular as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. I'm aware this needs to be a conversation, so I'm just joining in with you so you don't feel on your own. You talked about doing some hands-on work and some practical things. You've given a couple of examples. In what ways were local church members able to get involved?
So the community cafe is run by local church volunteers. It started off as just being a coffee session like every morning, but then when we got more involved in warm spaces, they increased it to doing a hot lunch twice a week as well throughout the winter. And again, that's all done by various volunteers from the church.
Oh, right. And they've been keen to get involved.
Yeah, really keen. Yeah, I think because with the people that started doing the coffee morning, then they would see how much of a need there was in the community, and then more people have kind of wanted to get involved. We've had like people come and do various talks at our cafe church, so I think people are just became more aware. I think also church members that were coming to our coffee mornings anyway were just seeing, gosh, there's these other people that are coming in who are actually currently experiencing homelessness. Gosh, it's quite shocking. What are we going to do? And they really wanted to help out. So, yeah.
And do you feel, or do people feel it's having an impact on the issue?
I think so, definitely. Yeah, I think what we've been able to do is try and, because we're supporting people in lots of different ways, and we do feedback to the church, and also because at the moment it's sort of, you might have people come for a few months, but some of those people have actually come to our Sunday services as well. So people are kind of getting to know people. So they're not just people that they don't know, but they're getting to know who these people are. And they will often talk about how they've become homeless and their experiences of sleeping rough, how they're surviving. So it just becomes, but they get to know people. So it becomes about relationships, really.
Yeah, it's about hearing the stories rather than people being a number in a statistic.
Yeah.
And has that had an impact on the congregation? Have they changed?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I've really noticed it actually, how people's attitudes have changed from being maybe slightly judgmental to a lot more understanding and caring and just being kind and wanting to give. If they can't give their time, they will offer to bring in. They'll say, what do you need for supplies? Do you need anybody, do you need underwear? Do you need socks? Do you need shower gel? Whatever. And they're really good at just, being really caring and loving.
And I guess that builds the church in other ways as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And I think they've also grown in confidence at talking to people who are experiencing homelessness. I think a few years ago, they wouldn't really know what to say, but I think now they've they'll sit with them at lunch and chat with them, and it's just become, what we do, really.
Yeah, they are human beings like us. That is fantastic.
Helen did want me to talk to you about a few stories. I don't know if you wanted to hear of some of our interesting kind of stories and experiences that we had. We had one guy who came to us, referred to us from We Are With You, which is our local drugs and alcohol team that's funded through the council. So the council basically said to them, go to the church, they might be able to help you. And it was somebody who was currently experiencing homelessness. They had been given temporary accommodation, but it wasn't suitable for them. It was in another area in Cornwall, and they didn't have any family network there or support. So they just couldn't manage in this temporary accommodation. So they came back to Saltash because that's where their family were, and they wanted to be near family and friends, but they didn't have anywhere to sleep. So we started off by giving them a tent and a sleeping bag, and it was in the summer, so they were okay. They were camping, sleeping rough. They would come to us for breakfast, showers, washing their clothes, and we got to know them over the summer period. Then the weather started to get bad and it became a bit more tricky for them, but they were able to get a boat on the river. As I said, we're very close to the Tamar River, so they started living on this boat, and we helped them by kitting them out with curtains and different supply bits that they needed, duvets, bedding, or towels. All the while we're still building up this relationship because we're seeing them every day. And in the end, they were one of the reasons for them experiencing homelessness was because they struggled with alcohol, and they were an alcoholic. And they really wanted to get help and support from the We Are With You team to try and help them with this. But it's very difficult because they didn't have anywhere to meet the workers. So here at the church, we were able to say, do you know what, you can have your meetings here in one of our rooms. So the We Are With You person would come and meet with them here at the church to try and start doing some work with them. The other challenge that they faced is the We Are With You workers, because they have to travel. They couldn't always make the appointments. So it was quite tricky sometimes because this particular person wasn't necessarily able to speak up and say, I'm feeling really down because my We Are With You person hasn't come. Can you help me, to organise another appointment? I feel that they don't care about me at the moment because they're not helping me, and I'm feeling, really down. So we were kind of able to be that liaison between We Are With You and this particular person. And in the end, after about a year of working with them and We Are With You, we were able to get them placed into a detox centre, and they went through a 2-week detox under the NHS. And after that, they were able to go into temporary accommodation. And this is about 9 months ago now, but they're still doing really well, really positive. They've completely changed their outlook on life. And they're looking at getting their own accommodation. They're looking at going back to work. They're able to engage with their family. All these things they weren't, to be honest with you, if they had carried on, they would have probably died through alcoholism because of the amount that they were drinking daily.
Wow, that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. There's almost nothing to say after that, but wow, and thank you for reaching out to them. And I guess it proves that one of the things we can do is just provide space. Like you say, space for workers to meet, space to feel safe.
Yeah. We have got lots of other stories, but we'll just tell you that one if you like.
Thank you. I noticed there was been some questions flying around in chat, one of which was about literacy rates. Is that anything that you've experienced down in Saltash, where it's about being unable to access literature?
Well, here in our church, we've actually had an adult education link into learning centre that's used one of our rooms for the past 4 years, which has been really helpful because we've been able to direct people and refer them to Link into Learning to get help with reading and writing and basic maths. But I would say that in our experience, quite a lot of people experiencing homelessness who we've given support to have got ADHD or various neurodiverse needs or mental health problems. So quite often they do struggle with reading and writing, and also form filling. That's really difficult as well for many people. And some of the forms that they're asked to do, they just can't access them.
And simple questions like, what is your home address?
Absolutely, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Either throw them in the chat or shout out.
No question. Just a comment from me, Keith Smith. Joe, brilliant. Okay, genuinely brilliant. What you're doing is great, and all I do is encourage you to continue. That's certainly where we at Ferry Project started, and the work we were doing. You're doing a great job. The showers, the washing machines, superb. We've done similar things in a local community centre and provide those facilities for people out in the community, as well as providing them with the services we offer. So I just all power to you, Elva. God bless you in what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to respond to the question in verbally on the literacy.
Thank you, Carin. That will be useful.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And thank you, Lorraine, for raising that. And yes, absolutely. There are many groups, especially young people, where there are issues with literacy and also neurodiversity being really prominent. So, of course, definitely having some kind of way of providing access to support is absolutely vital. I think churches are an excellent space for signposting and for providing some of those essential services. I spoke to lots of churches and food banks who were doing so much for people, and a lot of that goes into the prevention of homelessness as well. So when we're talking about families or individuals who are on the brink of homelessness, or really experiencing issues with poverty or other issues, relationship breakdown, all sorts. I think just having somebody to talk to, somebody who can fill out forms, absolutely crucial, because a lot of people will struggle with the bureaucratic sort of hurdles that you have to get through in order to get help. So I think that those are some of the most vital things that people in communities can do to prevent people from reaching that point where they are rough sleeping. And a lot of young people in particular don't rough sleep, will sofa surf, go on buses all night, do all sorts of, because it's not safe to be in a tent on your own out in the world. Some people will choose that, but yeah, so young people in particular are really important to provide that sort of community care to.
Yeah, thank you, Carin. That's very helpful. Jim, are you saying you'd like to ask a question?
Yes, a question both to Carin and to Joe. And I'm involved in working in the rural parts in Northumberland. One of the concerns, which is a kind of quasi-political question, I suppose, but it's very important. In terms of the faith communities, how would they respond to people who actually own second homes? Is it okay to own a second home in rural areas when these problems are around? Not least for young people that haven't been too mentioned today so far, but young people just can't afford to live in the areas. And so is it okay to have a second home?
Well, I'm happy to address that. I think that's such a good question. There's a whole long bit in our report on second homes. So you're absolutely right to highlight this. I think, philosophically, whether we should have a right to a second home is a much bigger question. But it is worth thinking about the actual repercussions of second homes in rural areas. Because it does take up housing stock. Also for people who do holiday lets, Airbnb, with properties in rural areas. I mean, I don't feel like I have the moral authority to say whether this is a right or wrong thing to do. I feel like I can't say that, but what I would say is that structurally, yes, it's a concern, because it does mean that there are less properties available for social lets. There's less properties built and land available to build properties that people with lower incomes can live. And yeah, absolutely, it does affect young people. Not that many young people feel like they can access, buying their own property anyway, because the prices are crazy. But we do need places for that people can rent at a reasonable price, and currently that is not the case.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair, just to link that question, and I suppose it does apply to quite a few areas across England, but certainly in the northeast here, is it government and local authority policies in relation to encouraging tourism is another issue, which has got positive and negative effects, because not every rural place, is a tourist attraction, in a sense, and in some ways, the places that are just off the circle of tourism don't actually enjoy the grants, don't enjoy the public services, don't enjoy these things, and it's really an issue in some parts that we have here in the northeast, which is a government kind of policy. And if one links to that, the other issue that central government policies in relation to greening the land means that these grants are going to the landowners. And I think over the next 20 years, 50% of small farmers will be eased off the land because of the so-called greening policies. So again, I think these are, for me, really acute political kind of social kind of concerns. And I do think that the faith communities have been a little bit light, in these kind of themes and these kind of concerns. But maybe that's just my bias view.
There are also comments coming up in the chat talking about interconnected issues about second homes, but also the availability of sustainable work that makes affordable homes genuinely affordable. And an example of some wealthy people who club together to buy a house for refugees. It's
interesting.
And then there's the tension between building new affordable homes and maintaining the green belt. It's a massive issue. Yes, maybe it's something that we as a faith community should look towards speaking on or looking at ways of responding.
Yes. Good to say that I've been encouraged by the policies that have been developed in Gloucestershire. I mean, I live a long way, but one of my colleagues from the northeast here was actively involved in the way that Gloucester faith communities, the Anglican Church, has, I think, is applying to be a housing association in its own right in Gloucestershire. And they've even got a bishop, with a special role for looking at housing and concerns. So, it's one very, very positive example of the House taking seriously, the politics of housing. And I don't know whether they've managed to achieve the status as being a housing association, but they've applied for it to be regulated, in a normal kind of way. So that's coming from a diocesan level in Gloucestershire, and it's worth reading if and I've certainly been influenced by it.
Yeah. I've just seen a note in chat that says we did discuss this housing association in a previous session. I'm conscious we are due to be having a break soon. Keith has raised his hand. Is it a brief comment, Keith?
Yeah, just a quick one, just for people to know. There's an organisation called Hope Into Action that was started in Peterborough, where people club together and buy property using their savings, and then local churches provide support within that property. It's a very successful model, and I'm sure they'd be happy to share their model with other people. But that is a church initiative in Peterborough.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. And thank you. That's been added into the chat for those who want to follow it up. Joe and Carin, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your research, for sharing your experience and your stories. I would say travel well, but you're not going far. Thank you again for coming. Joe and Carin, again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. That was really great questions, by the way, really insightful, and I love to hear about those initiatives.
Thank you.
We're delighted to also have Keith with us to share another story. I've got the pronunciation correct this time, Keith. So Keith is based in Wisbech.
Yes.
Not as I thought it was pronounced earlier. Without further ado, Keith, I'm going to just hand over to you to share your bit of the journey and the story that you are offering us as part of our focus on rural homelessness this afternoon. So,
great. Let me just introduce myself. So my name's Keith Smith. I was born in Salford and moved to Oldham and lived in Royton, a town outside Oldham, for my first 18 years. But then moved to Wisbech for my first job as a teacher. I'm a Christian. I became a Christian at the age of 19 in university, and the work I'm now involved in came about specifically because, well, very quickly, the story is that I lost my voice while I was teaching. I wasn't able to teach. I felt that God told me to get on and do something, and at the time there was homelessness within our area. And so I responded to what I believed God was asking me to do, and I started by coordinating the homelessness work that different churches were doing in the town, and realised that we needed to do much more. Yeah, you've raced well on into that presentation, so you can go back. That's out, right? Okay, so let's just talk about my presentation then. So the reason for the bit about myself is I had no experience of homelessness. And how to support a homeless person or how to develop a homelessness service when I started this. And God has led me through the whole thing. And that was now 25 years ago. The organisation has been operating for 25 years. And you'll see today we have now quite a sophisticated way of supporting people. So if you'd like to go on to the next slide, thank you. Right, so there you go. As an organisation then, started in 1999. Over the last 25 years, we've supported now over 3,500 people, and in an average year now we support 300 people in our area. We're fortunate, God's blessed us, and via various means we've got money together, and in Wisbech, property is very cheap. We do not get tourists in Wisbech. It is a very agricultural area, and the property here, as I say, is very cheap. So we were able to buy a hotel, and we managed to buy it for £1 million, which we got from grant funding from central government. And it's a grade 2 building, and it is beautiful. And we were able to do that with a specific intent of saying to the homeless people in our area, you are worth it, that you are not the dregs of society, you are not forgotten. We will buy and accommodate you in the best possible accommodation we can find, to send a very clear message to them. So if you want to go on to the next slide, please. Right, so just to tell you a little bit about Wisbech, just in case you don't know where we are. So Wisbech is right on the border of East Anglia. Peterborough is our nearest city. Kings Lynn is our nearest town, but Kings Lynn's 18 miles away. Peterborough's 26 miles away. Cambridge is 50 odd miles away, although we're in Cambridgeshire, and we are the furthest point in Cambridgeshire. So the furthest point north, we're actually on the boundary of Norfolk. So we're the furthest point west in Norfolk. We're the furthest point south in Lincolnshire, and we're the furthest point north in Cambridgeshire. And Wisbech is on the border of those three counties. In fact, the town itself, 1/3 of the town is in Norfolk, 2/3 of the town is in Cambridgeshire. And the whole economy of Wisbech is based around food. So if you eat vegetables, then a good chance that you will be eating something from our area. If you eat bread, you'll be almost certainly eating some of the cereals from our area. And if you eat strawberries, certainly 25 years ago, you'd have been eating strawberries from Wisbech. Now they tend to be grown in glass houses. The population of the whole town is 34,000. The next nearest town is 12 miles away, and that town has a population of 22,000. So these are market towns in little islands, if you like, in amongst the sea of farmland. Our population, about a third of the population is Eastern European. So the main populations are Lithuanian, Latvian, and Romanian at the moment. With the closing of the borders to the EU, those people have stayed and so are still present. Many of them still can't speak English. And we're now getting migrants from Africa and other parts of the world because there are very easy to get jobs in the area based on land work. You may or may not know the name or understand the term gangmaster, but much of our work is supplied by gangmasters. And gangmasters are simply people who bring together groups of people to work on farmland or wherever at seasonal times. So the local authority estimate there are some 7,000 jobs currently in the Wisbech area, specifically run by gangmasters. And if we actually look at the figures, on average, every year, 2% of our adult population are homeless because the gangmaster economy is not a steady one. So therefore, people move in and out of work, get more or less work on a weekly basis. So they can't buy a house. They can't rent easily. The properties they do rent, people tend to pay rent on a weekly basis, and the landlords tend to ignore the law or simply provoke people into leaving if they don't pay the rent. So there's this considerable turnover of homelessness all the time in the area. If you want to move on, please. So within the Ferry Project then, what we've done over the last 25 years, and it's taken us this long to actually work it out, is we've realized that if we're going to help homeless people, whether you're using a lot of houses or whether you're using just one, there are three parts to that support that you need to give them. So the first part of it is something that's called, in the jargon, trauma-informed care, but really means treat the person as an individual. So do not assume that everybody needs the same thing and will respond to the same type of behavior or support. Everybody is different, and you need to focus your support on that individual and what they need and what's happened to them. Something that wasn't mentioned in any previous talks, homelessness is not about being without a house. So people who are homeless for a reason. So it's not just simply a case of one day they found they didn't have somewhere to live. There is something that has happened. There is something that's going on in their lives that has caused this homelessness, and that something will be traumatic. It will, of course, had a serious impact on them. It could be family breakdown. It could be all sorts of issues, but the individual will have trauma in their lives and will be therefore either currently suffering from it or recovering from it, and that will impact their behavior. So therefore, many homeless people, their behavior is erratic, not because they are mad, dangerous, or anything like that, but they are currently going through incredibly stressful situations. And just like you and I get cranky when we get a bit stressed, same with everybody else. But we can respond very badly to a homeless person being stressed, because if you're in need, you're not supposed to be stressed. You're supposed to be grateful. So please just be aware that everybody needs to be treated as an individual. These people are under incredible pressure and therefore have tremendous support needs. So that's the first strand of it. The second thing is the place that you give them to live needs to be appropriate to their needs. So the jargon, again, is psychologically informed environment. But just like you and I, when we were children, we needed a house with parents and a certain size. As we got older, we got our own accommodation, maybe at university or maybe our first flat. As we got married, we needed to move into a bigger house, and children, you need bigger ones. Then as you get older, as I'm now, we're now downsizing and we're shrinking the size of our house as our family size changes. These are just examples of how housing needs change within a different scenario. So homeless people, it shouldn't be assumed that they would be grateful for whatever they're given. They might be, but that is not necessarily going to help them. You need to help develop a range of housing solutions if that's possible for you. And I would say over time it is possible. But we've been able to develop a range of some 8 different types of housing to meet the needs of different people on their journey out of homelessness. And then the third thing is help them to get some success in their life. Anything at all. We've got a whole range of things that we do, but that success, the fact that their life improves is key, because they've just gone through a whole process where their lives have crashed and they failed, and they know they failed. They might not admit it, but they know that things have gone wrong, and they need to start getting success, because success can build on success. But if all the time you're failing, you will just feel all the time that you're a failure, and you will respond as a failure, and you will expect people to treat you as a failure, and that just destroys you from the inside out. And just as Jesus helped people to stand, we need to offer people the opportunity, even a small opportunity, of cooking their own meal or helping in any way, doing anything successfully, just to give them the chance to start being built up rather than torn down. Anyway, move on, please. So, bit more detail. So our staff, we provide trauma-informed support. Our staff are trained in this, and if you get the ability to develop a charity like ours, you can develop this, and there's brilliant training now out there, but it helps us to cope with clients who are more difficult. So let's be clear, some homeless people are incredibly difficult because of the trauma they've faced. So sometimes our staff have to deal with people who will scream at them and shout in their face, who will be verbally very aggressive out of fear, and they will shout at the staff because they're afraid the staff are going to do something to them or emotionally hurt them. And we need to do trauma-informed support so that we can cope with that apparent aggression and get behind it and actually meet the real person who is hurting, and to understand, how can we help you? How do we get past it? So just like the madman who was demonized, and the pigs and all the rest of it, we need to be able to get to the person and not just the presenting behavior. And trauma-informed support helps us to do that. And when you're trying to support somebody, sometimes you might have to go through some really difficult stuff that they try and dump on you. And that's because of where they are. It's not that they're trying to hurt you deliberately. They're just in a place where they are hurting. So on to the next slide, please. So we've developed over time 7 different types of accommodation. I'll talk you through them. There they are. We've got names. So we used to call our building a hostel. The clients have now said that that gives a stigma to them. So they came up with the name, the term haven. And so we now have split our building up into different types of space where different types of accommodation are, and we call them havens now. We have different types of accommodation. We've managed to get funding for modular homes. So these are modern methods of construction. They're type of prefabs that are built. We've got some bed sits, and we've got some flats, and we rent property from other people. And by doing all this, we're able to provide a range of accommodation. And the picture you can see is our local MP opening some of our emergency accommodation. The block behind is a new block of emergency accommodation. And the people that you see there are a mixture of staff and clients and visitors celebrating the opening of a block that we opened a year last July. Could you move on, please? So let's just talk about that new block. So this block we managed to build thanks to generous gifts from people and the fact that we operate as a social enterprise and so on. And that is 9 units of accommodation. And to give you an idea of what we mean by psychologically informed, these are for people literally who are sleeping rough today, and we can provide them with a place to go. Now, a good example is we found that people who sleep rough, if they've been sleeping rough for any period of time, and you put them into a house or a flat, they actually find that very intimidating. They don't know how to look out after the house. We've had clients who will go and set up almost a nest in the corner of a room where they feel safe, and they will want all their possessions just around them in one corner. So these rooms were built with the conversations with clients and asking them what they wanted, and people who have been homeless and so on. And so these are very small rooms. There's enough room for a bed. They have their own bathroom. They have a wardrobe and a place where they can sit. and that is it. They don't have to keep them particularly clean because there's not much to keep clean. The doors all come out onto a garden, and they can get out of the building because they're used to being able to move at the slightest notice. And what they need from this accommodation is to feel safe. Living on the streets, you never feel safe. Many people in our rural communities are in our rural communities because they get away from other people. They get away from other people, and they can feel safe because there's nobody around. They are not afraid that somebody's going to come and attack them. Because in urban settings, people will literally walk up to a homeless person and punch them. They will kick them in the head. They will hurt them in different ways. So many people move out of those urban settings to find safety, a place where they can feel safe. So in this situation, these individuals can feel safe. They can get out of the property when they need to. They need to feel physically safe. They need to feel emotionally safe so that somebody's not going to be blaming them, not going to be attacking them, not going to be accusing them of being lazy, not going to be accusing them of being dirty or disrespectful or rude or things like that. They can feel that nobody is going to be attacking. They can feel safe. And then they've got to feel emotionally and spiritually safe. So they've got to feel in their innermost being that they are not about to be attacked in any way, shape, or form. And if we can provide accommodation where they can feel truly safe across the piece, then that gives them a chance to relax, calm down. And I would say to you that, and for myself, home is where you feel safe. So we are creating spaces where they feel safe, and it doesn't matter what the space is as long as they feel safe. This is where they come over a short period of time, over 6 weeks. They calm down, they relax. We start to meet the real person, not the defense mechanism that they've had to initiate. And as a result of that, they stay just 6 weeks. And I'll move on quickly. Next one, please. So Sunrise, we built some accommodation specifically for women who'd suffered male violence. And again, that accommodation is different. They have shared spaces where men don't tend to have shared spaces, but we developed that. Move on again, please. And there's some pictures of it. You can see the type of environment we've been able to create. Move on again. Clarkson House, that's our main hostel. This is what we're currently breaking up. And in that, there are 3 areas. One for people with high needs, mental health problems, learning difficulties. Some with short-term people who are going to be only with us a short period of time. We can help them solve their problems that led to their homelessness quickly. Longer term, they might have more enduring issues. And in those different areas, they have different room sizes with different things in, for example, different cooking facilities, because they want to engage with cooking live possessions in different ways. If you want to move on again, please. Jubilee Place, so these are the modular homes I was talking about. These were about the fact that some people can't live in communal space, so we were able to get these comparatively cheaply, build these. They're like 22-foot caravans, but they provide a brilliant place where somebody can learn to live independently again in their own space, but still in a community. Move on again. Now, opportunities. We've been working with health, and there's a lot now to that's available. So please get involved in your local health. There's something called an integrated neighborhood in every area. Get involved. And we've been able to now get a mental health worker coming in. We have counseling, we have art classes. North Brink is our local GP surgery who now come and deliver services to us. And there's all sorts of things you can see there where we've been able to get health services coming to us because they see that coming to homeless people is better than asking homeless people to come to them. And that's really helped, okay? And on again, we've opened a cookery school, and you can see the cookery school there where we train our clients how to cook, and it's a big social time and so on, but it gives them skills, and that's one of the things where they can do something very quickly. Our cook, every person who goes in, and they go in if they want to, she helps them to cook a meal that they can eat themselves, and they cook it themselves, so every one of them gets success in the very first session. On again, please. So that building there is the back of our building. As you can see, we're incredibly fortunate to have such a wonderful place. God has been very good to us. But if you've got any questions, and I know that was a gallop, but it shows you what is possible. We started with 11 volunteers than £300 25 years ago, and a hope to make a difference and God's backing. This is what he's created. The organisation we've got now has 42 employees, a turnover of 2.5 million, and we are the primary provider of homelessness services across Fenland, which is well over 100 square miles. And that's come about because of what he's done and the opportunities he's given. So
thank you very much. Thank you ever so much for that, Keith. I appreciate it was a bit of a gallop through, but at the same time, you raised some really interesting points and brought out the need to treat people as individuals. And I really love the comment about because you're worth it, and the valuing of people. We're going to quickly go into...
Is that right, Caroline?
It is, yes. I was just double checking. So hopefully you've had a good conversation in your breakout group, and just thinking about what each of us might do next as a result of all that we've heard. We're really grateful to all our speakers, but also for you coming along. And if you've got colleagues or anybody that you think might want to know more or just be interested in what we've heard this afternoon, Catherine will be sending all the stuff out in due course, and as she's written, we'll add all the resources to that as well. So do pass it on. And we've had this is the second in our series on homelessness, and our next one, subject to availability. Unfortunately, the film is coming out when we're planning it, which is The Salt Path, but looking at from one person's experience of homelessness, and that's Raina Wynne. If it's not that and we have to delay it, we have another plan. It's always good to have an option B, but Catherine will let you know as soon as we can, as once we've confirmed what it is, who it is, and when it is as well. So as we come to the end of our time together, as we move from this world back into our own worlds, as it were, we're just mindful of those who, by what life has presented them, means that they have no safe place to call home, but also longing for a place to call home as well. So we offer to God all that we've heard, for all that we have shared, but also the action to which He has called us, and that as we serve our communities, we may make the love of Christ known by what we do, what we say, but also in our prayers. So ask God's blessing on us all, His Spirit upon us, and always that we may share His good news. In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen.
Amen.